Hello, everyone. Welcome to Your World Discovered. My name is David Ewen, and on E.P.N. today, we'll be having Dr. John B. Rosenman. He is a science fiction writer, and today he's going to talk about science fiction and speculative fiction. He's been on our program before, and we welcome him back again. Dr. Rosenman, thank you for coming.
It's always a pleasure.
Now, let's tell us a little bit more about speculative fiction. In our last program, you had talked about that as a good introduction. Can you tell us first a little bit, for those who haven't seen the previous broadcast with you, your background in science fiction and speculative fiction?
Okay. Well, some of this is on my website, but I became infected, I suppose you could say, at an early age, even before 5, 6, 7, 8. I grew up with EC Comics. My father introduced me to Men of Iron and to reading when I was a boy. And I loved the science fiction, fantasy, and horror movies of the 50s in particular. And early on, I read Richard Matheson, who wrote The Incredible Shrinking Man, or just The Shrinking Man, and also Ray Bradbury. One of his novels is The Martian Chronicles. And all that kind of sank into me. I absorbed it like a sponge, and I was receptive to it. A lot of people wouldn't be, but I was. And I really think it fired my imagination. One early science fiction magazine was called If, 2 letters, If. And that's so much of what speculative fiction and science fiction are about. If. Just using your imagination to go wherever it may take you.
Now, some people say that Star Trek, if I were to use that as an example, and that's a program that's started in the 60s, and there's the big 50th anniversary, and they operate under an if. What if the world, or what if mankind was like this?
Right.
Does that fall in the same category as to what you're talking about and what you're involved with?
Yes, it does. Of course, remember, my category is a really broad one. If. It takes in so much. But Star Trek involves part of what you might call space opera, which, to translate it in layman's terms, amounts to westerns in space. Shoot them up with ray guns and things like that. When you ride into town, you're likely to ride in with jets behind you and find all sorts of unexpected surprises waiting for you. So Star Trek would be included, along with Star Wars and so on.
So with that, and Star Wars is coming out with its movies more so than in recent past. We talked about the 50th anniversary. So now that this is all happening, and also on television, the DC Comics related, the Arrow, Supergirl, and all the others, is sort of the science fiction and fantasy world in terms of the interest, the consumer interest. Is that coming to light more so now than in the past, or did it go away and now it's coming back? What's happening now?
Well, there was a golden age of science fiction, that came after the establishment of science fiction, in which everybody loved it. There were science fiction mass magazines, mass circulation. Then it faded, and now it's come back as ever before, as seen in particular in these blockbuster movies, the revitalization or resurrection of the Star Wars franchise and so on. Superheroes, in a way, it demeans science fiction because it aims at a mass popular market. But science fiction is very popular. One of the problems, though, to be frank with you, is, for me personally, it's harder and harder to sell because there's so darn much competition. So many people are writing science fiction as well as other genres. But this is an age for it. I probably should have mentioned more last time, hard science fiction. Did we go through that last time, hard science fiction?
Let's talk a little bit about hard science fiction.
Okay.
Tell us a little bit about what that
Okay.
is.
If I can hold this up,
Yes.
this is a novel from a new friend of mine, Robert G. Williscroft, who writes hard science fiction. And what this means, the science fiction he describes, futuristic science fiction, is based on science and extrapolations from current scientific knowledge. And we're reading each other's works. He has a little problem with mine because I don't always follow strict scientific principles or take a page or two to describe how a nuclear reactor works several hundred years from now. I'm less interested in that. It's what I write and what he writes. They are still science fiction. But I will be more inclined to trample all over current scientific knowledge and logical scientific extrapolations if it results in a jolly good story.
Well, we talked about, we may have brought up the movie Avatar,
Yes, yes.
which is not hard science fiction
No.
because of the nature, although there are in some elements of it,
Yes.
there might have that. Now, I wanted to ask you with the evolution of technology, for example, the mobile devices, the cell phones, and the tablet computers, which were considered science fiction of yesteryear, but common
Dick
today.
Tracy.
Dick Tracy, that's right. Dick Tracy
wristwatch.
was wearing the wearable technology that is now the iWatch, if you want to call it that he was wearing, or what have you. But also in terms of space travel, there's the commercial space race. For example, there's SpaceX, there's Blue Origin, and there are several other competitors involved in the space race. So there's the idea of space travel becoming, well, it's been around for a while, but now going back outside of Earth's orbit, outside of the orbit of the Earth, as the space shuttle has done. In the 60s, early 70s, we had Apollo, and of course, before that, Mercury. So now we're getting back into this space travel, and President Obama had an article or a write-up of a sort in CNN.com that talked about the interest. And now the discussion is that the next president in the 2016 election, starting in 2017, would need to invest, along with the partnership of NASA, and also in commercial enterprises, such as the two that I mentioned, SpaceX, Blue Origin, and many others that are involved. Those are the two that come to mind on the broadcast. Is that playing a role as to how science fiction will take a direction?
Well, it can create popular interest in writers who want to reflect that movement into space, which will also in the near future involve private companies in addition to the US government. But it all feeds into a renewed interest in space exploration, the mining of asteroids in space, and so on. It does have an influence. But there are so many factors that feed into it as well. One movie, for example, such as Avatar, which you mentioned, can generate a whole cottage industry of one kind or another.
Now, I mentioned on another broadcast, my father discovered that hydrogen existed in space, and this was in the early 1950s. And then following that, because of his interest in space and also following the launch of his own satellites on rockets, he was interested in science fiction as well, primarily not in books, but on television, as we had mentioned before. And the reason why I mention it is it kind of invoked a sense of dreaming and a sense of fascination.
Yes.
What is the seed that's planted in a writer who will eventually become a science fiction writer? What do you think that is?
I can tell you what it was for me, and I think it applies to other. It's a sense of wonder, of magic, of just what might happen. One novel I read, The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury is seminal. It's not the only one, but it's important. Never mind what Mars was scientifically. There were no canals on Mars. We found that. But in Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles, there are. But what might you find in a mysterious, undiscovered country, to quote Hamlet, or world, such as Mars? For decades, for centuries, people wondered about the red planet, but just to write about it is magic. And to read a novel like that is magic. Now, since we've learned so much about it, certain science fiction novels or stories are virtually impossible because we know so much more about it. In some ways, science both gives and takes away because it removes certain areas of speculation and wonder.
You make me think about something, things that are majestic. And here's an example, and I want your take on this. There was a time after the sinking of the Titanic, the famous cruise ship, that for the longest of time, it was not found. Where was it? But this interest in it was because that was a ship that had such majesty about it, if I could use that word. And then once it was discovered, then movies came about.
Yes.
How does that apply in thinking of something wondrous and amazing? You mentioned Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles, where we just spoke just not too long ago about commercial enterprises doing the space race. Mars is a destination. So Mars, in some way, is something that we wonder about and has a sense of majesty to it. Do we have other things that we wonder about?
We wonder, for example, about dark matter, what it is. It apparently constitutes most of the universe. We don't really have a handle on it scientifically. We wonder about black holes, naked singularities. What are they really? We don't have, for example, a scientific belief in faster than the speed of light. Yet in some science fiction, like my novels, for example, Beyond Those Distant Stars, black holes are used as a form of instantaneous transport from one part of the universe to another. I'm not the only one to do that. It may be sheer bunk. In my first novel in the Turton saga, Inspector of the Cross, our hero goes down a black hole with an alien, and they experience each other's thoughts and feelings throughout millions of times as they make this transport. I suspect this is sheer bunkum. But what we have learned about black holes, since it's only partial, opens the door to all sorts of speculation and story weaving. It's remarkable. There are other areas too. The whole field of nanotechnology, using tiny, perhaps submicroscopic devices or robots, machines, for example, to clear out the arteries of the heart. That first, I became aware of that in a movie which I saw. I'm trying to think of the name of it, in which people are shrunk to submicroscopic size, introduced to into a person's bloodstream to perform surgery on his brain, with the development of nanotechnology and robot surgery, using robots to perform surgery better than humans can. Writers, science fiction writers, speculative fiction writers, leap into the future and take it to areas where it is not yet gone. So a little bit of scientific development or enhancement of human knowledge opens the door to all sorts of stories.
Now that our audience knows a little bit about you, let's talk about how they can find out more about you, for example, on your website or Facebook or What's the best way to find out about your books? How do you tell people that?
One way is to go to my Amazon page. I wish I had the link right here. I have it on my computer. That's one place. I have all my books listed. You can also go to my website, www.johnrosenman.com. One other place is my blog site, johnrosenman.blogspot.com. Those are three places to go. And if you want to know more, just email me. And I'll be glad to chat with you.
Very good, very good. And what do you see in the horizon for your writing? What's coming out?
That's a good question. I reached the ripe age of 75, and I'm no longer as prolific as I used to be. I'm trying to continue the Inspector of the Cross series. My publisher, Muse It Up Publishing, wants me to continue writing it. So I've written 5 novels, 2 are in the pipeline to be published, and I've got new adventures and problems for our hero, ready for him. Besides that, I'm just waiting for a short story idea to nibble at me, to catch my attention. All it has to do is knock once, and I will answer that darn door. I think I may have mentioned to you, perhaps I didn't. I used to go into a local Barnes & Noble, which was so inspirational. And about every 2 times I went there, I would have a story just leap into my head from something I glimpsed at or saw. That doesn't quite happen as much anymore, but I'm willing. All I'm waiting for is the ideas to come.
Very good, very good. My guest today has been Dr. John B. Rosenman. He is a science fiction author, and you can check him out on Amazon.com. Dr. John B. Rosenman. Doctor, welcome, and thank you for coming to the program.
It's always a pleasure.
This is Your World. I will see you next time, and this is Your World Discovered. My name is David Ewen, and this is E.P.N.